So, how much does what you wear actually influence how other people see you and even how they treat you? Today, we're going to dig into a really provocative study that used hard data to investigate a super divisive social issue. It's a story about clothes, perception, and, yeah, a pretty controversial conclusion. You've probably heard some version of this statement before, right? It's been debated in courtrooms, in the news, everywhere for decades. It's incredibly charged, and it sits right at the heart of a 2021 research paper that tried to untangle this complex and often really fraught relationship between what we wear and how we're treated.
So you've got this real clash of perspectives. On one side, you have the fundamental right of a woman to express herself, to wear whatever she wants. And on the other, you have this call for women to dress, appropriately, to prevent unwanted attention or even assault. To really investigate this social flashpoint, researchers in the Philippines decided to stop arguing and start digging into the data.
Okay, so how on earth do you even begin to investigate something like this? Well, like any good detective story, the first step is to look at the methods. The how they did it is just as important as the what they found. The whole thing went down in Quezon City, which is the most populous city in the Philippines. The researchers talked to 870 people, but they didn't just poll a random group. No, they specifically tracked down men, women, and a separate group of fathers, because they wanted to get a bunch of different viewpoints from distinct social roles. Now, before they could even ask any questions, they had to be super clear on their terms. So first up, provocative dressing. For this study, they defined it as not just revealing clothing, but the deliberate exposure of one's body with the goal of attracting attention. Intent is key here.
And the second really important term they defined was sexual objectification. That's the moment a person stops being seen as a whole individual and is instead seen only for their physical attributes. Okay, so with these ground rules set, the researchers could finally start gathering their clues.
So the first piece of this whole puzzle comes from the male perspective. The researchers turned to the 385 men in the study to really understand their reactions and beliefs when they see what the study just defined as provocative dressing.
And whoa, the first number they got back is a big one, over 91%. Let that sink in. That's the percentage of men they surveyed who reported getting physically aroused when they see a woman's cleavage. This set up a really powerful baseline for the study. The visual element here is incredibly potent. And the data shows how this initial visual response kind of connects to these broader perceptions. It wasn't just arousal. You can see that nearly 3/4 of the men believed a woman in revealing clothes was intentionally trying to seduce them. And then look how that perception seems to translate into behavior. Over 86% said they were strict about how their own partners dress.
Okay, so what about the dads? This is where it gets really interesting. When the researchers focused just on the fathers, their reasons were pretty layered. The number one reason they gave for restricting what their daughters wear was about social perception. They didn't want them to be judged negatively. But right on its heels was this desire to protect their daughters, alongside their own personal or religious beliefs. All right, that's one side of the story, a really important side. But what about the women? To solve this puzzle, the researchers absolutely had to understand their motivations and just how aware they were of how they're being perceived. So, when the women were asked for their top 3 reasons for dressing this way, the answers were pretty direct. The number one reason, from over 76% of them, was to show off their bodies. That was followed very closely by a desire to attract men. And then standing out from the crowd was also a big one for more than half of them. And this next part, this was a real turning point in the whole investigation. The researchers posed a very direct question to the women. If you wanted to seduce a man, what would you do? The response they got back wasn't just a majority, it was absolute. Every single one. Every single one of the 385 women they interviewed gave this answer or something just like it. So in the minds of the women in this study, there was a 100% correlation between wearing revealing clothing and the act of seduction. You can see why this was a critical piece of evidence for the study's authors. And this awareness went beyond just their own intentions. The women they talked to reported being super attuned to male reactions. A huge majority, we're talking over 97%, said they noticed their own partners looking at other women who are dressed in revealing clothes. This suggests a deep, deep awareness of the visual impact their clothing has. All right, so the researchers have all their clues laid out on the table. You've got the male perspective, you've got the female perspective, you have reported reactions, and you have stated intentions. So, how did they piece all of this together to actually come to a conclusion? They built a really direct chain of logic based on what they found. Okay, step 1. The data shows that women know revealing clothing gets male attention. Step 2.
The women in the study unanimously said they use that kind of clothing specifically to seduce. Therefore, the authors concluded, when women wear these clothes, it implies an intent to attract sexual attention.
And to really hammer this point home, the authors used an analogy. And look, it's a really powerful and, let's be honest, an undeniably controversial one. They compared a woman dressing provocatively to someone jumping into a swamp full of crocodiles, basically arguing that the action itself implies an awareness and maybe even an acceptance of the risk involved. So, let's be super clear about what the study is and isn't saying. The crucial point here isn't that clothing causes assault. The authors state very clearly that many victims are not dressed provocatively at all. Instead, their conclusion, based on their data, is that dressing this way is a factor that can either minimize or increase risk.
So, based on this conclusion, the paper actually puts forward 3 pretty bold recommendations. They suggest some big policy changes, like a decency law for public dress and new rules for the media. But they also include some social advice, suggesting that women should be more cautious about their behavior.
The study from Quezon City offers a conclusion that's built from its own specific set of data. But in doing so, it really forces us to confront a much larger, much more universal question, and one that has no easy answer. In a shared society, where is that line between an individual's right to self-expression and our collective responsibility to each other?